Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the time has come when we must say goodbye. It's been a great few years, but ultimately I need to make a change. Note to self, add some context to the title. I am of course talking about my i5-12400F CPU. It's a chip I've been using in my personal rig for a long time now. It's been paired with various cards over the years. At the moment, it's been hooked up to a 1080p monitor with an RTX 4060, and it's been more than enough for all of my gaming needs. Now, of course, I do test other hardware, and I do have access to other hardware for benchmarking videos, but at the end of the day, when I want to sit down and play one of my favourite games, this is the system I do it on, the i5-12400F 4060 and 32 gigs of RAM. It's also the system I use for editing most of my videos too, and it's surprisingly capable in DaVinci Resolve. I have made a couple of changes over the past few months. The H610 basic motherboard has gone. I now have a B660 board. I found a deal a while ago on an MSI B660 board on eBay that was too good to pass up, and I thought I could sell my H610 board, get half the money back at least from the sale of that, and the B660 board had a second M.2 SSD slot as well, which is what I needed, especially as games are getting bigger and bigger. You know, I like to make these personal rig updates every so often, and today is one of those. I like to think these can also be helpful in terms of helping you decide whether or not upgrading from one CPU to another is worth it. But without further ado, let's get into it and talk about the upgrade I've made to my system. So, as I say, I've been using an i5-12400F, a 6-core 12-thread CPU, and honestly I'd still recommend it as part of the Socket 1700 platform. Some would say I'll just get AM4 or AM5 instead, but Intel is of course still an option, and I think it's still a pretty decent option, especially when you consider that there are some really great affordable chips out there, the i5 being one of them. Now that said, I was recently browsing on CEX, who seem to have upped their warranty as well to 5 years, and I came across one of these. It's an i7-12700F. Now you're probably thinking, is this a worthwhile upgrade? Well, for £150, I thought this was pretty well priced, and again, I thought if I could sell the i5-12400F, I could get at least half this money back. I then thought, hang on, Intel actually sent me this i5 a while ago, so I don't think I can sell it. But never mind. I thought for 150 quid, I don't have to swap out the motherboard. I don't need to change the RAM again. I'm still using 32 gigs of DDR4 with a new B660 board. Everything can stay as it is. I'm also using like a 15 quid CPU cooler, the Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE. This has been absolutely fantastic with my i5, and I'm thinking it should be enough for the i7 as well, because it's quite a power efficient chip from what I've read. We do see a jump in core count as well, so we should see a nice difference in terms of the stuff I use my PC for, especially as far as editing is concerned. I like the fact that the i7, especially on the used market, is not only a sort of sensible and decent price, I think, at the moment, but it's also something that can help bring the most out of more powerful graphics cards as well. So I don't have to either use the i5 or the i9. We've got a nice in-between point, which also represents what I feel is decent value for money in early 2025 too. Plus, it's going to help speed up some of my editing tasks as well. Don't get me wrong, the i5 was fine, but if we throw up this little chart here between the i5 and the i7, we can see that the i7 outpaces the i5 in the Cinebench R23 result, and then when this translates to real world performance, we can see that it is a lot faster in the DaVinci Resolve render test as well. So I think for £150, it's a pretty solid deal. Plus, I didn't have to upgrade my motherboard, swap out my RAM. Now, as I mentioned at the start, I'm using a 4060, and some of you may be thinking, well, is it worth an upgrade to the CPU outside of editing, of course, if you're using something like the 4060, which may present us with a GPU bound situation more often than not? Well, I've run through a few benchmarks here with the 4060 and the i5 and i7 in the same system, and I want to share a few results with you. So we'll start with Cyberpunk 2077. Now here at high settings, we're seeing 88 FPS on average with a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 45. When we switch to the i7, Our average frame rate has improved by 1 FPS. I'd say this is within margin of error territory, but what we notice, and this is something that you're going to see throughout, is that the percentile figures are higher, and this represents more consistency. The more cores and threads make for a smoother experience. Even with the same GPU in the system, we may not be getting a higher average a lot of the time, but we are getting smoother overall gameplay, and I'd argue that that is equally as important as a higher frame rate. Stalker 2 1080p, this is a very demanding title, 66 FPS on average with the i5, with a 1% low of 36 and a 0.1% low of 19. So as you can see, it does fall apart a little bit in and around those more densely populated areas or just particularly demanding zones on the map. With the i7, the same average can be seen, 66 frames per second, but a 1% low has gone up to 53 from 36, and our 0.1% figure is 48, up from 19. So again, there's a lot more consistency here. Baldur's Gate 3 with the i5, 109 frames per second, a 1% low of 61 and a 0.1% low of 37. Don't get me wrong, the i5 12400F is still a solid budget choice. I mean, it's about 100 quid here in the UK, and I don't think you can really go wrong for that sort of money. Sure, the percentile lows may not be as good as they would be with more powerful CPUs, but for what you're getting at this price point, I think it's still a great choice. I don't want to start bad-mouthing it just because I've upgraded, because I simply can't do that. This CPU still has a special place in my heart, and it's still a very good choice for gaming. Now when we switch to the i7 for Baldur's Gate 3, the average goes up to 114, the 1% low up to 74, and the 0.1% number 47. So still a couple of dips and drops, but again, it's smoother overall. For Counter-Strike 2, our average frame rate is 234, our 1% low is 119, and our 0.1% low is 79. The i7 331 on average. This game does like a good CPU, and I think that's why we can see the difference here. The extra cores are really giving us a boost in the average frame rate here. Our percentile lows are also much improved, 163 and 103. Again, don't want to slate the i5 at all because it's still very capable, but we can see where the improvements have been made here, even with a modern so-called entry-level GPU. The Witcher 3 1080p Ultra in the city here. The i5 135 FPS, a 1% low of 94 and a 0.1% low of 79. Another very solid result. The same average with the i7, but again the percentile lows have seen a bit of a bump in performance. Perhaps not as significant as in other titles, but they are still noticeable. Red Dead Redemption 2, 90 FPS with the i5, 66 as that 1% low and a 0.1% low of 62, so these are actually really consistent as they are. With the i7, 100 FPS on average, so 10 FPS more, a 1% low up from 66 to 83, and a 0.1% low up from 62 to 77. Finally then, for the 4060 results, we have Kingdom Come Deliverance, one of my all-time favourites. Cannot wait for the second one, it's going to be amazing. Hopefully, 139 for the i5 with a 1% low of 67. And in and around Rattay, a pretty demanding area here, we see a 0.1% figure of 15. So some problems here and there. This is something that I've seen on a few 6-core chips, is a drop to the percentile numbers. The i7 146, so a slightly improved average there with a 1% low of 96 and a 0.1% low of 75. So this is where the extra cores and threads really help out. Now what I like about the i7 12700F as well is that I can still keep it cool with this 15 quid Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE cooler. Bought it on Amazon between 15 and 20 pounds a while ago, and it stays really quiet with the bundled fan while allowing it to stretch its legs as well. So I think we're seeing full potential from this i7 with a really cheap CPU cooler, and that's another thing to bear in mind with this 12th Gen F series chip. You can keep them cool with cheap coolers, which is always nice to know if you're putting together a PC on a more strict budget. Now I probably won't be using something like a 4070 Super, but I wanted to throw in a few 1440p examples here just to show you the difference if you are gaming at higher resolutions. So we have the i5 97 FPS, 54 is the 1% low, and 43 is the 1% low in Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p. When we switch to the i7, we do see some improvements again with the average and percentile numbers. Similar story in Baldur's Gate 3. This time our average has gone up from 112 to 131. The 1% low has gone up from 62 to 77, and the 0.1% has gone from 42 to 52. Finally, when we look at our most troublesome game with the 6-core chip, we've gone from 140 to 161 as an average, and our percentile lows have gone from 58 and 15 to 81 and 53 respectively. So again, some noticeable differences that you can actually feel as well. Now, I'd like to reiterate that the i5-12400F is still a really decent choice, but hopefully I've shed some light on why I wanted to upgrade. I always like to share these upgrade videos with you just to let you know what's going on with my personal rig and hopefully help you out and help you decide whether or not an upgrade like this is right for you as well. If you're rocking an i5-12400F, is an upgrade to something like a 12700F worth it? I think even with the 4060, it's worth it for the gains in percentile numbers, and it's certainly worth it if, like me, you are a keen editor as well. Now, some of you may be wondering what happened to the 7500F Ryzen I was using a while ago. I did have a 7500F in my PC that I planned to use on a daily basis, but I ended up selling it. Reason being is that I had a friend who wanted a 7500F. They were thinking about buying one on AliExpress, and I ended up just selling it to them to save them the weight, basically. In the meantime, I thought, I'll just put my i5 machine back together, start using that with the 4060 as I was, and then I ended up never actually going back to a Ryzen. I bought a 5700X3D briefly, which, as you probably know, I dropped by mistake, so bent all the pins, ended up selling it as 40 because it wouldn't work in PCIe 4.0 mode. That was an absolute disaster. So the i5, if you like, has been the rock throughout all my PC related endeavours over the past few years, and it will be missed, but I will be keeping it. Of course, Intel sent this to me, so I don't think I can sell it anyway, not without getting in trouble probably, but I'll keep it, and it will certainly be brought out in those budget GPU tests, that's for sure, as a nice affordable pairing. But I think the i7 as well represents something that isn't too expensive these days, but something that can still also get the most out of more powerful GPUs. Maybe not top tier GPUs, but it's something that I look forward to testing with a few graphics cards in the future. Anyway, before I start rambling too much, I hope you've enjoyed this video, a personal upgrade log. Let me know your thoughts down below. Leave a comment telling me that you definitely would have gone for a whole new Ryzen build instead. I know there are going to be a lot of those comments down below. But as always, thank you for watching. Thanks for your support. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course. And hopefully I'll see all of you next time.